all we have left are the lungs and the pituitary gland to cover. Now, I know this is a lot, and I haven't even got to the Renin Angiotensin Aldosterone System yet, but guys, I just wanted to give you a better understanding of each organ that is involved in this, and not just how it has an effect on blood pressure, but also what are the key features of the organs themselves. So the lungs, there's a lot that actually goes into the lungs, and I would recommend that you do go and do more than what I give you here, but I'm giving you the basics for now. So here we go. Let's just talk a little bit anatomy before we get into the physiology of this thing. So starting at the top, you got the trachea, and it's starting at around C6. Now, for those of you who don't know where C6 is, another good comparison is just to say just below the cricoid cartilage. So we know that you have the laryngeal prominence, the thyroid, and then thyroid cartilage, and then the cricoid cartilage is just past that little divot. Anyway, there's that, and then at T5 is around where the bifurcation of the bronchus or the trachea bifurcates into the left and right, or right and left main bronchus. So that otherwise is known as the sternal angle or the angle of Louis. So that's just some landmarks to help you know where your trachea is and where it bifurcates. So the trachea itself is roughly around 5 inches, 1 inch in diameter. And another cool thing is that these little rings you see are U-shaped cartilaginous rings. And they aren't fully circular because in the back it's connected by muscles. And those tracheal muscles, I can't remember the name, actually just help keep the integrity of that trachea. And I try to depict the esophagus behind it, but again, kind of hard. Anyway, let's keep moving forward. What's important about the lungs? Of course, we know it's involved in breathing mechanics, and it's involved in gas exchange, ventilation versus perfusion, and blah, 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 blah. But also, we need to know about the anatomy of it because there's differences between each lung. In fact, the right lung is separated by 2 fissures, which create 3 lobes. So you have an upper, a middle, and a lower lobe in your right lung. And then in your left lung, you have an upper and a lower, or a superior inferior. And that's separated by 1 fissure, an oblique fissure. All right, now we know that. What other things do we need to know? So the right lung is actually bigger. It's shorter, and it's wider than the left lung. But the left lung is smaller, more narrow, and taller than the right lung. Some other things you need to know are the after the bifurcation, the primary bronchus then bifurcates again. In the right, if there's 3 lobes, would it make sense that it bifurcates into 3 secondary segments? And those 3 secondary segments then turn into tertiary segments. And those tertiary go in and eventually become your, Your alveolar sacs, where gas exchange and blood exchange occurs, or ventilation versus perfusion. So now that I said all that, you have 3 over here, which eventually go into tertiary alveolar, and then you only have 2 over here. The other difference you need to know as like a clinician, you would need to know about the origin or the orientation of them. So one is actually more narrow more steep, so straight up and down. It's shorter but wider. It's wider, and that's going to be the right one. The right one is you're going to see problems with like typical pneumonia, with the basal crackles or things like that. You'll see a buildup there, or that's at least where you should be looking. And on the left, it's going to be longer, it's going to be more narrow, and it's also going to be a little bit more horizontal rather than straight down like the right lung is. So anyway, let's move on. So that's the basic importance of the lungs. The other thing you need to keep in mind are the pink and purple borders you see around it. I put purple for the parietal layer. So this is the parietal pleura of the lungs. And then on the inside, this is the visceral layer. I say visceral because it's just meaning organ. It's the pleura that's closest to the organ. So it's going to be called the visceral layer. And there's something cool about this here. Now, this layer actually doesn't have pain nociceptors. So if you ever had a problem with the lungs, it wouldn't be until it distends or stretches the parietal layer that you actually start to feel pain. And that's just like the liver as well. The liver itself doesn't feel pain, but that parietal layer on the outside does have distension or can feel pain to distension. So with cirrhosis or something like that. All right, guys, that pretty much wraps it up with the lungs. Those are the big takeaways I wanted you to take. One more thing I could give you physiology of it, the gas exchange. Why is that important? Why is this shape important? Why is the thousands of alveolar sacs we have in there very important? Well, gas exchange. Not only do you have a ventilation first perfusion rate of 4 to 5, but also this gas exchange, you have enough room, about 40 square meters your lungs create in surface area to allow for gas exchange. And if you don't know what that looks like, I mean, it's quite a lot. It's like a small apartment. So that's a lot of work for your lungs that it has to do. So it makes you appreciate it that much more. So the last thing is types of cells you're gonna have to be familiar with. There's type 1 and then there's gonna be type 2. Now the type 2 are gonna be like your surfactant, and you're gonna have to know for embryo what week that surfactant is produced, around 34 I believe, and then obviously when the child takes their first breath is when you would obviously notice problems there. And then you have type 1 as your pneumocytes or something like that. I can't remember, but I just remember those type 2s, and I need to go look at those type 1s again. I'll put it up on the screen so you guys know the difference. Anyway, that's about it for the lungs. It's the basics you need to know, and of course we're going to talk about this angiotensin converting enzyme in the lungs in just a little bit. So stick with me, guys. One more thing: not the hypothalamus, but the pituitary gland. We need to know about the anterior versus the posterior. I might tell you just what they secrete, but I want you to know really about that posterior because it's got that ADH, and that's important for the Renin Angiotensin Aldosterone System. Let's go. All right, guys, so here you have it. This is my depiction of the anterior and posterior pituitary gland. Now, we're gonna focus on the posterior pituitary gland today, but it's important to know what is released or made in the anterior pituitary gland as well. But let's start with the posterior first. So we know there's 2 hormones that aren't produced, but released and stored in the posterior pituitary gland. And these 2 hormones are oxytocin and ADH. Now, I said released and stored and not produced because the hypothalamus and the neurosecretory cells, or the supraoptic nucleus or the paraventricular nucleus, is actually where these hormones are created. And then they're sent down here into these blood vessels to be secreted throughout the body. So what's oxytocin do? Well, that's going to be important for uterine contractions during pregnancy of a female. So for the muscles there, I don't know if it's relaxation or contraction. I can't quite remember. Could even be dilating of the cervix. But anyway, I'll have that on screen for you guys. Next, we have milk letdown. So suckling of a child on the female breast during or after, obviously after birth, is going to cause oxytocin to be released from created in the hypothalamus, released from the posterior pituitary. All right, you got that. That's the 2 you need to remember. Next, and then also we talked about ADH. Just real quick, ADH vasopressin, which is going to help auto-regulate blood pressure. So if you had too much, let's say, calcium or sodium in the bloodstream, then the ADH would be released and it would cause you to absorb more water so that you dilute that sodium or calcium that you had in your system at the time. All right, guys. So now on to the anterior. The anterior is a little different because even though it does have some neurosecretory cells, these are only releasing the hormone-releasing factors. So the factors that the hormones need to be told to release what they're creating inside. Because the anterior is a little different because it actually creates its own endocrine or its own hormones via their endocrine cells. So these endocrine cells are laid throughout here, and then once told to be created, it'll send one of these six hormones. So the ones you need to know that are most important are, of course, TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. That's going to go down to the thyroid gland. And then ACTH, going to go down to the adrenal cortex above the renals, of course. And then you have, that's adrenal corticotropin hormone, by the way. And then you have FSH and LH, so follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which are going to go to the testes or the ovaries. Then you have growth hormone. Of course, growth hormone is important for testosterone, for any type of growth, and that's going to be used in the entire body. And then we have prolactin. Prolactin is important for mammary glands, so the production of mammary glands. And then you also have, this isn't a hormone or specific, but endorphins. The reason I added this was because of dopamine, and I wanted you to know that most of these are going to be acted on by the releasing or the hormone releasing factors. The only thing that is not is prolactin, because prolactin is acted on by dopamine, which has prolactin inhibiting factor to act on prolactin. So that's the difference, and that's kind of something you should maybe know. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for the anterior and posterior pituitary gland. Now it's just time to put it together with the Renin Angiotensin Aldosterone System.
Later.